Augment the thinking of adults is going to be very similar to augment the thinking of toddlers. So previous video is going to be a stepping stone for the story of today. The first thing I want to draw the attention to in previous video is the type of technology. It's not state of the art, hard to get, hard to manufacture technology. No, it's very common uh, tools you can get in any hardware shop. It's just a touch button, right? And then the webcam and some software, and you're set. And the tools to actually augment your intelligence are very basic. I mean, one of the most ancient I can think of is a sundial, which is used to tell the time during the day. And without this basic tool, it's very hard to tell the time during the day. So we could go over the history of technology and see many of these tools that have became scaffolds for our intelligence. And if you want to know more about that, I think there's a very nice book by Andy Clark called Natural Born Cyborgs. That's definitely worth reading about it. Okay, so when we look at the technology for amplifying the intelligence of an adult or augmenting its thinking, don't be surprised that it's very rudimentary, basic technology. That's the first thing I wanted to elaborate. The second thing relates to the concept of flow, and the concept of flow. I've actually have another video where I elaborate the more controlled experiment on amplifying intelligence of adults. For basically, it was a 3-year master course for business students to understand the complexity of software engineering, and it was wrapped up in a situation so that they would build their own startup. I'll give the link to the video. It's a pretty long video, but it explains how you go from intrinsic motivation and use this concept of flow to stay in the zone. Now, stay in the zone, flow, there's actually another video I can quickly show you that explains what the basic principle is.
It's about changing the contents of your consciousness. So how can we change the contents of our consciousness? One of the best ways to do this is to put ourselves in a state of optimal experience called flow. Csikszentmihalyi describes flow as the state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. He goes on to say that concentration is so intense that there is no attention left over to think about anything irrelevant or to worry about problems. Self-consciousness disappears and the sense of time becomes distorted. And you've probably experienced this before, and it's absolutely one of the best feelings in the world. If you're working on your business, you might be so focused on what you're doing that 12 hours might pass and you have no idea. All of a sudden you look up and you realize you haven't had any food, you haven't thought about anything else. The only thing that you could focus on was your business. And the same thing applies to so many other activities, whether you're a rock climber focused on climbing your new record or a master pianist composing your new masterpiece. It's an amazing feeling. You're so immersed into what you love doing, into what you're really good at, that your brain simply can't focus on other things. You're not worrying about stupid things. You're not regretting what you did yesterday or stressing about what you'll do tomorrow. It's absolutely one of the best feelings in the world. So, if we look at the flow diagram, here's how you put yourself in the state of flow. You don't want what you're doing to be too challenging, otherwise you'll have anxiety. You don't want what you're doing to be too easy for your skills either, otherwise you'll be bored. But it's when you balance these two that you end up in the flow channel. You're striving towards the upper right corner constantly. You increase your challenge, you get better. You get better, you increase your challenge. And the more you move toward that direction, the more intense the state of flow gets. So this is not really a how-to book, but our goal should be to find what it is that we love and then keep getting better at it and keep making it more challenging. Or in other words, the main goal is to spend as much of your life as you possibly can in the state of flow, because that is where you find this unbelievable ecstasy.
So the introduction of flow shows that it relates to a specific activity like creating your business, rock climbing, or playing music. Now, if it comes to augmenting thinking, you want the activity to be reflection towards your own internal model. And then you see some interesting new constraints. First of all, the group size. It's probably like a dozen kids would be perfect, but if you get too little or too many, it disrupts the setting because too few, and probably there's not so much interesting events you've been able to capture or to talk about. While if there are too many, what you get is that not all the kids will be in flow because they probably need to wait too long before they can tell their stories. So it needs to be like a certain tension between listening to the other kids and being able to participate in it. And if we shift to the augmented thinking of adults, we're going to see similar problems with a new challenge because the kids, they don't have a lot of life experience. So the knowledge sharing they can do is pretty aligned to all of them. While if you go to adults, I mean, it's becoming pretty fast, pretty diverse. So you can narrow it down by going to create a specific event around a specific topic, for example, healthcare in a very specific place. I just couldn't get to a concrete example. And for the research we've been doing, we've been participating in digital communities. And so we have created this event around what are the new tools for building websites. That's something early, early in research. And so later in the research, you see that it becomes all the time more and more specific. So first it was all kind of technologies, then it was just specific content management systems, then it was very specific Drupal, and then you saw that within Drupal it became very specific only to scalability, only to multilingual, and all the time you see this specialization happening. But at the different moments, you see the kind of groups coming together that you want. But then even then, it's a challenge of the critical mass and getting the people together. The first tools that we've been using was open space technology. And I guess that the tool itself isn't very well known, so I'll introduce it in a sec. But before I do, I'll just want to emphasize the size of it. You need several teams, and probably a team would be something like a dozen people. So you probably need something between 50 to at least 50 to 70 people to get a simple open space going. And it was noticed that in such an open space, it only works when it was really well implemented and was a very limited amount of intelligent amplification. But let me first introduce the tool.
It's a Saturday morning in July, and around 100 people have got together to talk about work-related issues. Mostly people working in local public services. They've come along to attend an unconference.
A local GovCamp is an unconference for people who work in and around local government, and it's an unconference because unlike a traditional event, there's no preset agenda. So the first thing that we do in the first hour of the day is to have people, normal delegates, come forward and suggest sessions they'd like to run. So there's no keynotes, there's no sort of grandstanding or anything like that. It's purely about the people who attend and what they want to talk about.
Really good. I haven't been to one before, and so this is new for me and a very good learning experience.
Unconference is fantastic. It's an opportunity to come up for air, to meet like-minded people from across the country, from different organisations.
Unconferences are places where you get to experience innovation, new ideas, you get to meet some wonderful people.
I mean, this is the third year we've done this now, and the numbers keep going up every time. So there seems to be a great deal of appetite for this way of working. And I think those people who come to it for the first time certainly feel like it's a bit of a breath of fresh air, really.
So I've mentioned that somewhere participating between like say 50 or to 70 people in an open space was efficient in respect to the augmenting the thinking when applied properly, because I've also seen several that were not applied properly. But it becomes even more interesting if you put it as part of a bigger event, because then the people, those 50 to 70 people in it, will not always be the same. So there is like another level of flow of people through the open space conference. So we've seen this with conferences around 300 people. And then something very interesting starts happening, because if you start scaling it up to like 3,000 people, and the bigger Drupal conferences were this size, there's a whole new kind of dynamic that appears. And the first thing I want to address to is like the keynote, because the keynote is more or less already something that gets you into a reflective flow. If it's a very good keynote speaker, and on very large scale conferences, they are mostly, they should be. So they can already get you into a kind of flow. But what, because of some practical reasons, the organizers decided that there wasn't a Q&A, a question and answers in the end. But if anyone had a question or answer, you could actually just write a specific Twitter hashtag, right? And then ask your questions on the Twitter feed, and the moderator of the keynote would pick questions in the end to get answered. And as part of the participation research, I've been involved, been doing it, and it's interesting to see that while you're listening to a very good keynote that brings you in this mental flow mindset, at the same time you're like looking at the flow of comments and jokes and good questions. And that's interesting, because suddenly you see that you ask a question about the keynote in real time, but it's never popped up in your head, it's popped up through the Twitter feeds. So that really gives the feeling of like an extended mind. And at the same time, that's like the question you really want to get answered. And of course, it's if there's a good moderator, he will pick up on those questions, and those questions will get answered. So suddenly you feel like this whole auditorium of people is part of your own cognition, of your own mind. And that's one aspect of the intelligence application that really went pretty far. Another aspect is called birds of a feather. Birds of a feather, it comes from the saying birds of a feather flock together. It's like, you know, those, maybe you can show an image of the bird, where it's coming from. But it's like small breakout rooms. It's like these open spaces, but now for 3,000 people. So you don't go to 50 or so. We actually in Chicago had a whole floor of small breakout rooms. And if you just like, instead of like giving the label on a piece of paper, you could put it on the website. And I've experimented with it by just creating very specific topics, and see if the right people would come into the room. And we always had like, sometimes it was 8 people, sometimes it was 16 people. So we had the proper size of group, and we had the same dynamic like with the open space, but highly specialized around a very specific topic. For example, Drupal and the accessibility for disabled people. I was just trying stuff, but suddenly you see people that were really like, they were like shocked at, or like very attracted by the topic, and they would have extreme interesting things to say about it. So it really worked well. And but then you need a size of 3,000 people. So you see that the thing I've learned mostly from this is that the technology is basic, but the collectivity around it is huge. And I've made attempts on that in other places. I have a Dutch paper on this, trying to make awareness of this that we can, from a collective point of view, become individually stronger, and we may not need to rely on the most talented people if we can mediate the collective intelligence. And that's going to be a topic for next video, where I'm going to look at more recent activity. I hope you enjoyed.